Hi everyone, and welcome back. Today I am doing just an overview video here of this particular setup. I'm actually on the road right now. If you can see behind me a minaret of the Excalibur. Perhaps you can make that out. A little better there. And I'm on the way to UC Irvine to do a presentation / performance that will be using this Eurorack setup. And so this is actually my first time going through TSA with the entire kit, as I'll show you, and that actually so far has been pretty smooth as a process. And recently I picked up one of these tip-top audio cases. It's kind of hard to see here on the camera, but basically it's a travel backpack with straps on the back there, and the whole tip-top audio Eurorack case will fit inside of there, and it's really easy to unzip it and then to show TSA just the contents, because that's of course always probably a concern when you bring on any kind of electronic gear. It's not the kind of stuff you want to check in your luggage, of course. So I have three main pieces of gear. One is the Eurorack case, and I'll go through that, what's happening there. I have the Korg NewTek NTS1 synth, and I'm using that both for synthesis potential and also for the very nice effects, including this rising reverb, which I just recorded on one of these tracks here. So a very small piece of gear, and I'm actually powering that with the one of the USB batteries, and so I don't even have to necessarily plug it in if I don't want to. I should probably just turn it off now to save the power. And then the third piece of gear, it's actually more than this, but these are the sound producing pieces of gear, is the Leaf Audio Soundbox MK2, and I actually have one of the rods I brought along, and I put that in my check baggage. I'm always thinking that some of this gear is drawing suspicion or something like that, because sometimes it's so different, you would think, than what TSA typically sees, but who knows. But anyway, this went in a different backpack, and like I said, I checked some of these parts in my check baggage. And then I also have a set of speakers. Originally I had these two Anchor speakers here. I've just used these before if I'm ever doing small projects. I can have any of my Eurorack gear out, and these actually are pretty good sounding, so I got a second one, and I'm using a splitter from the Levitate, one of these of course, and for purposes right now I'm taking one into my audio recorder and the other two into these speakers. In addition, I have this larger speaker, and these are all purchased on Amazon, and this has a lot more bass response. So I'm going with these then three speakers to actually use for amplification. And this one, I forget the watts, the rating of it, but it was much more powerful than these small ones, and these have a more trebly response to them, and this is giving me a little bit of bass. So what I will do when I'm performing or playing is use one of these splitters and then just simply take three outs into the auxiliary in of each of the speakers. And that's one of the nice things about having the Levitate in my Eurorack setup right now, is it allows me to do mixing, and I can very easily then just take the summed outs out of channel 8 and run those into my speakers. And so it's a real easy setup just in terms of a road performance Eurorack case. So I'll maybe talk about what I'm going to be doing at UC Irvine using this gear, how it's going to be used for a seminar presentation, but I wanted to do it just to add some atmospherics to some of the writing sources and other things I'll be doing, speaking, sort of spoken word. So when I put together this case, I originally thought I only wanted to bring one Eurorack case, of course, and so I asked myself what would be the best way to maximize the tip-top audio case and to strip down what was previously in here, take out some of my other modules that are in the second case, and then create a new Eurorack set up here just for the sake of this performance. It really started with the 3 Folk Tech modules, and there's actually a 4th one here, Matter as well. So I thought if I'm going to use these modules, very possibly I don't need a lot of clock sources. This module here, Motion, as you know if you're familiar with Folk Tech, gives me so many options in terms of clock sources just coming out of the breadboard headers. Either these here or these on the side, different clock divisions. And what's cool about that is then I can, once I made the decision to use Motion, obviously I thought about bringing in some of the other Folk Tech modules. Now you do have some options here. You could just use this as your primary performance sequencer. It's nice to have Mental because you can actually then take some of your breadboard in, your DuPont ins, and use those as various clock sources to trigger other modules. You could also potentially, I have a module I didn't bring with me that translates from our DuPont cables to our 35mm cables. I could also use something like, I brought a couple of these alligator cable and attach to get a clock source and then attach it here. Seems like in some cases we have to be cognizant of grounding on some of our modules, so it's one thing to think about. But if I'm using Motion as the performance sequencer, I thought I might as well bring in Mental because it has a lot of possibilities in a space, and none of these modules are small. You could see that the entire mescaline takes up most of a tip-top audio case, and so they're not necessarily small modules in terms of their size, but their potential sonically and also in terms of having clock sources, I think, is what makes them so valuable for this case. So once I decided on those 3 modules, I said, I'll have my sequencing here, I'll have drones and effects with channel. One of the nice things, channel was maybe the one of the 4 Folk Tech modules I almost pulled out of the case just because it is nice for drones and the effects which you access down here, but it does take up a lot of space. So I left it in. And of course, having Mental gives me a lot of sonic sources. What I'm doing then is just patching in like the 2 outs from Mental into my Levitate. And as you'll see in a couple of these performances here, based in Las Vegas, at the Excalibur as I'm heading towards Irvine, Levitate does allow me to have performance-based mixer that allows me to bring in the various voices throughout the performances. I also thought because I have the whole DuPont setup, when you have something that has DuPont as its native source, if you will, again keeping in mind we can translate with some of the nice convert jacks available on Mental, and you begin to see then why those 3 pieces of the mescaline fit together nicely. But I can take more clock sources from Motion and run those into Matter, and Matter gives me an additional array of sounds. I could also bring in clock sources this way and trigger with the DuPont to the headers there. So a lot of options there. So another sound source, and again because it's using the native DuPont cables there, I think it just makes a lot of sense to have that included in my Eurorack case. Now after that I really thought I have to bring in my nano version of Mutable Instruments rings. I've had rings for a little bit of time, purchased this new on reverb.com, and I've found just the sounds of it, and I have the Parasites firmware loaded in there, which is really phenomenal, and I have the same Parasites also on Warps. But I just find that Rings is one of the best sounding modules that I have. I also have a version of Elements shrunk in one of these non-native modules as well, and that one is pretty amazing too. It takes up a little more space, but I really wanted Rings in there to give me some of those nice percussive sounding patches. It's also nice having the 2 outputs. I was actually just recently using that, running the 2 into Warps and creating some really cool wave folding and wave oscillations there. But I thought that would give me a really nice timbre break from the folk tech, which will never sound anything close to like physical modeling or anything like that, which is why I think we mix modules in a case like this. I then thought to complement it, originally I didn't have bell in here, but I have my 2 HP bell to give me some additional FM sounding or physical modeling sounding, percussive patches, bells, chime type patches, and it helps, I think, cut through the mix. And for any number of these outputs, well, I should say for triggering, I can think about using various sources, again, using my convert ports from motion or from motion into mental. I could also potentially use, say, something like the CV out from motion. I've done that a few times, and I could run that in, say, to the level input of warps, and almost instantly I get a really nice, like, percussive syncopated beat that will, I think, play nicely with some of the other patches that I'm playing or some of the other rhythms that I'm playing. At any time, of course, I can patch into any number of effects. I decided just to put a few here, so I have 2 HP verb if I need any reverb. I have my Pico DSP, which has some pretty cool effects. And then I also have the 2 HP freeze, which is, granular. It does bit crushing and so forth. It's kind of a multi-effect unit in a sense, and that's nice to do some rhythmic things or some experimental things. I also put in my Synthrotech passive multiplier, so if I ever wanted to, instead of using these guys, I could use that either for audio or CV signals. I think I should have put in here, I didn't, my divider module, and that's maybe one misstep, because I could use maybe a few additional clock sources, although I think with what the variety I have with motion, I think I'm going to be okay as far as clock sources. But maybe that's one oversight potentially. I also have the Expert Sleepers Disting MK4, and this has a ton of different algorithms. There's like nearly 100 of them. I just have it set up actually playing some WAV files off an SD card, and that's actually for another project I'm working on, a student performance coming up doing some musical expressions, and I'm going to be using maybe some of those samples. But I could use this module for a lot of purposes, generating LFOs, clock signals, and so forth. One challenge of it is I didn't bring my patch book, and I don't have those memorized, so I may just leave it on its setting to play the WAV files. So that's a great module. It's just really hard to use because it's so small in terms of width, and you have to do a lot of menu diving to access the various parameters and then to remember what they are. And then the last, and I also put my 2 HP pluck in here as well to give me a few more string synthesized sounds, physical model sounds. It does some nice drones. I can run that through the reverb, either the 2 HP verb or the nice effects here in the Folktech channel, or the effects in the Korg NTS1, which are really amazing. This little box, by the way, if you're just trying to supplement your synthesizer setup, your performance synthesizer setup, can't go wrong. It's a put together kit, and it's 99 bucks, and it does some pretty amazing sounds, and the effects are really lush and nice, and it has filter, and really kind of amazing what this does for its small form factor and price, and its low price. The last module I put in, I got recently off of Reverbs with some Reverb bucks. It's the Mutable Warps, and I had heard a few demos of Warps online using the Parasite firmware, which I loaded in here, and I found like it was going to be maybe a really nice addition to my setup. I didn't have a wavefold in here. I could have certainly put my Tip-Top Audio fold processor, which is a nice one, but Warps does much more than wavefolding, and I won't get into it, but it really is a very versatile module. With the Parasites loaded in, you have so many options here in terms of panning delays, in terms of vocoder effects, in terms of traditional wavefolding and some experimental wavefolding algorithms as well. Very powerful module and easy to patch. One of the things I was concerned about in doing this performance is how will I make this work just in terms of having something that I can talk, set it up, and use kind of simultaneously. This also has a nice performance feature. The light's very cool, and it's really easy to use. It almost reminds me of a DJ setup, just in terms of the dial and how radically the sound changes. There's a really nice frequency shifter algorithm that does some dramatic shifts of the sound in terms of frequency. So very cool module as well. So that's the main setup of the case, and as I said, the Leaf audio will come into play, and it will come into play through a variety of different techniques, including using a snare, what do you call this, a snare spring, or just, it's for a snare drum, but it's real nice on the sandpaper of the Leaf audio, and actually nice on a lot of the surfaces of various sorts. I mean, you can't go wrong with it, really. So that's kind of handy to have as a performance instrument. I also brought along a variety of clips to put into the side port here. I kind of took this apart for travel. I'll have it set up before I do my presentation performance on Monday. And then I also have a couple pieces of wood that I'm using just to scrape the springs. I also brought along 2 gauges of fishing line. I tried this in a couple of my experiments that you can catch online, some of my new micro environments that one or two I did in particular in Folsom, California, and I found that using this as an instrument, moving it back and forth and tapping on each side of the line really played nicely with just triggering the internal piezo's here and making some cool sonic sounds, making some cool sounds. And so I think this will be very handy to bring in that electroacoustic side of things, and I have a lot of options. I can run it through the Korg NTS1, and if you're doing that, one thing you probably want to bring if you're traveling and doing a performance like this is make sure you do have some quarter outputs if you have anything like the Leaf audio, because you have to go from quarter to your 35 millimeter, or you have to go from your quarter to 35 millimeters. So just want to be able to do that. In this case, the Leaf audio inputs and outputs are requiring that, but typically I would just probably take the output and run that into an effect, either the Korg or one of the effects here up in the Eurorack case. So that is the setup, and again, I was really interested in creating something that would work in terms of traveling, something that would have a lot of sonic potential, and something that hopefully would be performance-wise easy enough to use in a way that I could quickly patch stuff and talk on top of it and explain some things as well. We'll see how that part works, because that is going to be the hardest part, just in terms of the practicality of patching in the DuPont cables, which are really small and sometimes take a while. But once you get this started, as I think you'll see or hear in some of my demos, you might realize that it is possible, I think, to use a setup like this in a performance setting in a way that's practical and also sonically interesting. So that's it for now. You can hear some of the experiments. I'll do a couple here from Las Vegas as we're looking at the Excalibur here, the minarets on the Strip, very rainy day in Las Vegas. So I will be back with some additional experiments and videos like this, focusing on music and other topics. So thanks for listening, and I will catch you at the next video.